Hey everybody, it's Jane Johnston with the Briar Hill Group at Remax Camosun, host of Vancouver Island Time. And he said, she said, they said. And today we have
Hi, everybody. It's Andrew Plank with Royal LePage Coast Capital. And today we have talking with us.
Russell Cass with a HomeCheck, home inspections, and island depreciation reports. We're going to be talking today about condo inspections and how effective they are. A lot of people wonder, actually, if there is a depreciation report, is a condo inspection worth it? And also how to read the depreciation reports to see whether or not they're giving you the information you need to make a good buying decision. So, Russell, how are you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me. Trying to keep quiet in the background and let you guys take the lead.
Good. Well, we were joshing around just before we got on, so that's why I'm laughing. Sorry.
Yeah. We don't have any fun here.
So, Russell, often when buyers are looking at condos, they're trying to determine, first of all, if having a low or a high monthly assessment is a good idea. What does that mean in terms of buying and selling? And then I often like to have you come in and do a report with my clients because then you can look at the whole financial picture. So let's just talk, first of all, strata fees or monthly assessments. Good, bad, ugly, high, low. What's your opinion?
So first off, the balance in the contingency fund. Let's tackle that one. That's kind of like meeting a partner and they got a lot of money in the bank and they're great to marry. But next month, that may not be the case. With a condo, it's all about if they've got a lot of money in the fund, but they're not doing any work to the building, that's how they got a lot of money in the fund. And those costs are going to come back and bite everybody. The fund is not intended to have lots of money in it. It's intended to have the money to cover the costs. And so it will ebb and flow. As the money's used, it'll be replaced by more money and more contributions, and maybe the occasional special levy, just to keep it getting over those humps of when things are going to occur. So it really is no clear reflection of what the building is in terms of the big picture.
So they need to look at, the whole fund, as well as what the monthly assessments are as
it relates to depreciation report, right? Because that's what's going to tell you what your future costs coming out of that contingency fund will be.
Correct. Yeah. And the fees are kind of a reflection of that. So if the fees are adequate to keep the fund topped up, and if you look at a contingency fund over a 30-year projection, you should be seeing gentle curves occurring. You shouldn't be seeing those high spikes and big drops. That is either a poorly done depreciation report where it's all about replacement. That would sometimes explain the high jumps, or a strata that is reactive. They're not being proactive to issues coming up in the future.
So just like that person you're looking to marry, you want to look at their personality and
absolutely
history and how have they actually taken care of their finances in the past. They may have just had a windfall, but it's going to be gone tomorrow.
I think Andrew can do this. Do you guys need me? You're absolutely right. No, you're right.
Yeah. Because you're the person who actually comes in and gives. We can talk about the philosophy of this, but you talk about the nuts and bolts, and you're the person who, when we are selling a condo or a townhouse, that strata unit, who can come in and actually look at that depreciation report forensically, which we don't do. What we do is we tell people, you've got to call an expert like Russell, because they're the person who's going to be able to tell you, if you should marry this condo or not.
Yeah, that's
why I have a question though.
Yeah, sorry, Jane, go ahead.
So I recently, I think you were the inspector, or Chad was the inspector on a condo where they were just about to get their balconies done. It was a very simple building. I always tell people, you want to look at the whole building. You want to look, does it look like they're going to need new balconies? How many have been done? Are they doing them all at one time? Is there an underground parking? Because that brings its own problems. How many elevators? How many people in the building? Where are they sharing their costs? looking at the building envelope, the roof, all that stuff. How so when we're looking at that, and I'm looking at the strata fees, I'm thinking, okay, well, it looks like they're building up because they're probably going to pay for something. That's strategy that some people do, and that sometimes they have special assessments. Um, but often when we read the depreciation report, it's 2 or 3 years old already, which means it's probably like 3 or 4 years old because it takes about a year to write the things. So it's out of date, and I find often what the strata amounts aren't reflective of the one of the three plans that have been recommended by the depreciation report writer. So how do you respond to that?
All right. So first off, our legislation, and we had a previous chat about this, is I think one of the best in the country because we have the three plans. Strata is not forced to follow anyone. They have the ability to choose what they want to do. And people often say, well, I haven't picked one, and I'm very nervous about that. Well, going back to that married story again, it's all holistic. It's about everything. And it's just what you just said. It's the building envelope. It's all of it. In actual fact, if you really think about it, a inspection of a strata property, I believe, is more important than the inspection of the single family home, simply because in a strata, you're regulated. When it comes time to have that money, you must have it. There's no choice about it. And so it's really important that you understand that. In the single family home, you could throw a tarp on the roof. You could put some duct tape on the broken windows. No legislation to stop you doing that.
So
but in the big picture of a strata, important, really important.
You have choice when you own a home, and you may not be making great choices, but you can make the choice to not replace that roof and not do the work that's required when the roof's even leaking. But when the strata roof begins to leak, you have what you're saying, you have a responsibility as a strata corporation to take care of everything.
Yeah. And it's a regulated responsibility. I mean, it's one thing to say you're responsible, but the next is you're forced. You must.
Yeah.
So important.
There was reference to sort of the three levels in the depreciation report. Can you explain what those are, the like A, B, and C options, and what those are and why they're there?
So they're there because it's legislated. There must be a minimum of 3 financial plans. They are supposed to be different. If they're done correctly and they're projecting consistent repairs and maintenance, because I have found the odd one where the costs in different plans are different. That's not supposed to be done like that. Right. They're supposed to be consistent. Then one can measure the inflows of capital to see how that's going to affect the owners in the building down the road. So some may indicate special levies occurring, in which case you know about it, you can plan for it. If they're happening within 6 months of buying in or a year of buying in, that may open a discussion so that you can talk between buyer and seller and work out who's going to share those costs, if anybody. And others will just indicate a cash flow with no special levies at all. What's also always important in each of those is to see how much money is left at the end of the fund. Yeah. So you may find 3 plans, all with no special levies, but one's got 35,000 at the end of the 30 years, and the other one's got 4.5 million. Right. So you'll find vast discrepancies in the contribution levels to try and achieve that.
Yeah. I mean, so what you're saying is the report itself doesn't change in terms of the upcoming requirements and the costs that will be levied potentially. But what does change is the strata fee. If you take the strata fees as you're continuing, my understanding is generally it's if you're continuing on with the strata fees as they currently are, a status quo kind of financial outlook, this is what your future looks like for special levies. If you take a more aggressive approach, this is what it'll look like for special levies if you raise your strata fees. And this is maybe what it looks like if you do the minimum requirement and you're going to have special levies every 6 months. Yeah. Is that kind of in keeping with it, or is there a requirement that you do those in that kind of order, or?
No requirement at all. They just must be different. That's all.
Wow.
And that's why I say, in my opinion, that's a a mature approach to follow from legislation, because they're giving people, owners, a lot of latitude to make up their own minds. So we have a democratic regulation, more so than others, which are very prescriptive.
But again, no reason to have someone like yourself review these things, because if they're not all consistent, then you need someone who can actually recognize the differences.
Absolutely, yeah.
So one of the things that I like about the way you approach your depreciation reports with Island Depreciation is you do the depreciation report and then you go back every year, and for a small fee you're just kind of monitoring where they are in the whole process, which I think is important because you're independent. Your perspective is one of maintenance and repair as opposed to always replacing, which I appreciate. However, I've also seen that when you are talking to people who are owners or purchasers, you talk about maintaining their own sort of quota of money on the side, so that then they're able to save up. And if they don't spend the money, then they can take that with them. So it's kind of a balanced approach, I think, anyway.
Yeah, and it is important, and as you've heard, I always talk to people about the amount of money of shortfall of the fund per unit per month, breaking it down so that they know what they need to be saving. Why that becomes even more important is that money saved by an individual can be put into their tax-free account. That money can make money for them tax-free until they need it. The strata has no such benefit. It also is restricted very wisely by regulation, preventing them from taking risky investments. And so the return on that capital in the CRF is going to be low. And in fact, often is much lower than what construction inflation is running at. So putting some money away as an individual in a strata, it really is important.
What do you find generally is like the balance that people should be putting away? Like, is it 150, 50, 250?
We've done almost 3,000 of these that we've analyzed. So I start breaking them down from the numbers that we have, bearing in mind that not all the depreciation reports are 100% accurate. So that does kind of tend to throw it a little bit. But anything that is $100 or less short when we've done our calculations, those are buildings within the top 10% in the city. When you drop below that 100, the next sort of gear we have is between 100 and 250. That makes up probably another 35 to 40% of the buildings in the city. And then we drop below that, where now there's buildings that are 500 short, $1,000 short per unit per month. And once we get into those really big numbers, it's generally more about the report being very heavy on replacements and then pessimistically done. So that tends to impact hugely on the final numbers coming out.
So one of the things also that you do is because you're doing a number of inspections, I don't know, maybe 25 a week and maybe, I don't know, 10 are condos. So you're going back to condos again and again and again. Are you seeing people who are getting the inspection with you? Are they affecting the outcome of the strata? They're like, are they taking that information and going to their strata and saying, hey, we should increase our payments every month, or we need to, oh, by the way, the roof is leaking, we need to focus on this?
I would say yes. And I say that because I don't have any real absolute proof of that. However, we do not advertise our depreciation report business at all. And we constantly get people knocking on the door. And some of the comments is John so-and-so is in our strata and he suggested we talk to you. And we get a lot of business that way. And I think that a lot of the people that we've spoken to and educated, they're aware that you will never get everybody in the strata to put all the money away, which I think is a bad thing in the first place, just based on the investment of that money. But you'll also always have people in the strata who will not save. It takes a discipline. And being an old soldier, I am all about discipline and systems and doing it right.
And I think the thing I've observed with, sorry, Russ, the thing I've observed with people who own condos is there are people who do not save, and those are the people who vote against doing the work that's required because they don't have that money saved. And so it is important that you, when you're buying a condo, that you look at, who, read through those strata minutes, read through all of the information and get a sense of who your co-owners are and what kind of decisions they're making and how have they been, just like, again, using that marriage analogy, how have they, what's their past history? It'll give you a hint to their future history.
Absolutely.
Are they going to be
Absolutely.
reliable and dependable and a good partner?
Yeah.
And the other thing, like you say, you get people coming in and they maybe talk to somebody and they call you up. I always suggest to my clients, if you want to be involved in this building and you don't like the way it's currently being steered, get involved in the strata and get involved in sharing this information, because things will happen. Things people, they happen because you're involved or they happen to you.
You've hit the nail on the head. There's three things I always tell people involved in the purchase. One is get involved. You don't have to be on the council, but be engaged. I always explain about the owners will decide, and it will be a quorum of owners, not every owner. People get that misunderstanding in their heads that everybody's going to decide. Well, when 50% don't show up, 50% aren't part of the decision. Only the quorum is. So be engaged. Talk to your neighbors. If you have some knowledge, don't keep it as a secret. You're in a community, share it. And one of the things we have is every inspection we do, we're always available for follow-up questions. And I get people from Stratus phoning me. They bought in, they have an AGM minute, they send it to me 3 years later. They want to find out, what does this mean? How can I be equipped with the knowledge to bring this up in a strata meeting? How can we resolve what this is?
What are major issues that come up in Victoria? Is it roof, parkade membranes, elevators?
I find it's a bit of everything, but you've kind of hit some of the big ones. Parkade membranes are a big one. The cost is enormous because all of the earth's got to be moved, everything's got to be taken away. Then you get to the membrane, replace it, and then it's all going to be put back again. So that's a big one. Roof, obviously, depending on the complex. Sometimes it's not a big issue because it's a 20-story building with 170 people living under that square footage. So it's not that big. But then you're in a townhouse with 165 units. And they're not double story, they're single and they're big units. They're 2,000. Well, now you have huge roofs. Yeah. So it can vary. Elevators, absolutely. Elevators fall under Factory and Machinery Act, so they're required to be inspected and maintained, and that's why you find all the stratas have contracts with elevator companies. And generally, that is where they get quite well informed because the person maintaining it is telling them constantly, you're going to have to do this, or this is not part of the contract, and we know it's coming up. So there's quite good information on that generally. It's the other parts of the building that kind of in the dark unless they become proactive.
So what do you see is we had the leaky condo issues in the 80s and 90s, and we seem to be mostly through that, but I'm sure you still come across some examples. But what do you see as our sort of future area of concern when we're looking at condos purchases?
Sure, there's a number of them actually. One is the leaky condo definitely was a major issue through the late 80s and into the 90s. The cure to that was the building envelope rain screen that went on, which I believe came into code in 2006. There were buildings, some that did it pre that, but I'm now starting to see depreciation reports written by some professionals that are indicating that those will only have a 40-year life. Mm-hmm. Now, we haven't gone through 40 years, so it's an educated guess. But that's an enormous cost to be repeating every 40 years if that's true. And so I think that there are some design issues that ultimately need to be dealt with there, but that's beyond me, and I'm getting too old, frankly, to have any interest in how that will be resolved. But somewhere down the line, that needs to be resolved.
I remember you were talking one time, a building had a rain screen done to it, and you're talking about the fact that the type of nails
Well, the securing points for that drain screen when it goes on, you have a huge amount of weight that's hanging on the fixings, and I suspect that's where there's concern, is that ultimately those fixings are going to either corrode or they cannot hold the weight any longer. So perhaps that's where the 40-year projection's coming, because nobody really knows. We may go through 100 years. We don't know. It's kind of like this pandemic. We all want to know the answer, but until it happens, we don't really know.
Yeah.
Andrew, do you find this when you're looking at buildings? So I recently showed a place on Morrison, and there's the building beside it that had leaky balconies that were rotting posts, and people were just leaving that building so quickly, and special assessments were coming up. And I find often buyers are really, really scared because they know the special assessments coming up, and they're like, oh, but what? It's change. Change always makes people hesitate.
Mm-hmm.
And then the building beside it is pre-construction, they've done half of their balconies, and the front half are going to have to be done. And so I told the buyer, I said, that's the after. This is the before, right. And the price is really low. Right. And if you can put the money aside, that you're going to end up further ahead,
if you have the cash and you're willing to live through a renovation, because they're going to have the scaffolding and the green tents over it, and they're going to be, there's going to be people, outside your balcony working away. If you can live through that, you're going to save yourself some money, potentially, because they're difficult to finance when there's a big special assessment coming up, and B, a lot of people don't want to live through that. So you will save some money on the front end. You'll have to have that money set aside for the work. We've seen costs of construction explode recently, so that's the unknown entity, I guess, there, versus buying something that's already kind of been done. But certainly I remember back in the day seeing some condos sell for $40,000 or less during the leaky condo situation, when a more standard condo was maybe $200,000. So you could get some great deals. But there are two buildings, sister buildings. One on Manchester.
I knew you were going to say that one.
Yes, and one on Dunedin. And they were both built around the same time. One was remediated early on, and the other one they never remediated. They have a huge contingency fund. They continue to take care of and patch that building. They think they've taken the approach that it's not requiring a rain screen or what have you, and some buildings didn't. But the value of that property on Dunedin is consistently less than the one that was rain screened 20 years ago. Right?
The one on Dunedin was rain screened. It was the one on Manchester that wasn't.
No, other way around.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The one on the right, the building on the right?
535 Manchester was rain screened.
Okay, yeah.
Dunedin is 545 Dunedin, I think.
What do you think, Russell?
Yeah, so the complex I'm thinking of, Manchester, Dunedin, there's two buildings in the one complex, and from my knowledge, neither one of them has been rain screened. The one that Andrew's talking about is just down the street, and I think it was done around about 2002 or 2003, something like that. And well, it's been interesting for me because I've been to all these buildings, and I've watched the policy adopted by the building that has not been rain screened. The owners wisely, I thought at the time, decided to up the strata fees, make sure that nobody lost their homes, and consistently repair the building. And that's an option not explored by a lot of stratas. And I thought it was admirable that they did that. Where I think it starts to get a little shaky is where here we are, and we're almost 20 years later, and we still haven't got to. So what happens is the cost of remediation consistently grows away from them. And they also at some point decided to not put so much money in anymore, which that makes that process a little tougher. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of other things that, I'd rather discuss privately, because there are some issues with reports on the building that are done by the same person doing the repairs under different company names, and the reflections are. But anyway, to me, if you have a problem, deal with it. There's always an ability to gain time by repairs and maintenance, but 20 years isn't gaining time anymore. Yeah. You've slipped into the rut and you're staying there. Whether it's that building or any building, it goes the same for anyone that does that.
Yeah, we're just using those buildings as a sort of illustration example, but in general, we see this throughout the city. And anytime that there is work required, as Jane alluded to, there's going to be some cost savings, but also when it comes time to resell, if the property hasn't been addressed, and that's the thing with buying one of those buildings that needs some work, if they don't actually address that issue, you're not going to get that raise in value. You're just going to have something that's going to be hard to resell. And there are lenders who will not lend on certain buildings.
And that I'm beginning to see more and more of that. And that's why Jane mentioned earlier, we came up with a concept prior to this becoming almost a requirement, but insurers are now looking at buildings and saying, well, your report is old, or your report talks about a lot of work and has consistently spoken of it. You've never done it. So come renewal, we're not going to be interested unless you do these things. Otherwise, you need to look somewhere else.
Yeah.
So we're 2021 and these started 2013. Some people did them in 2012. I know that there's been some buildings who have consistently over time voted. They have to have 75% vote not to do them. Is that legislation changing?
There was talk of it about 18 months ago. Carol James, when she was finance minister, the wording she used, what she's going to close the loophole on depreciation reports. And while she didn't spell it out, to me, it's pretty clear she was talking about the ability to defer and put them off. But that has not taken place yet. I suspect at some point it will. Bless you. I think it's been a long-term warning that you need to get your house in order. You need to get these reports done. I think the government's pretty pleased overall that people have done them. And even having done it once and maybe not updating it, when we go through a depreciation report and it's old, we're increasing costs for inflation. We're taking the loss of time that they've had to do this, and we're building in a factor for that. What we can't tell you is the next 5 years or the next 7 years where those reports are 7 years old, the new things coming in the projection. We could, but it's so cost inhibitive to do all of that a client wouldn't want to pay for it.
How do you, when you are analyzing reports, do you find that there are certain people who write them who have a bent? So maybe they're more mechanically oriented, or maybe they're more pessimistic, or maybe they're more focused on replacement as opposed to repair?
Well, I'm getting old and I see just about everybody are bent, including myself in some way or another. We all have things that we like, or don't. But yeah, certainly. It's quite understandable that somebody who is a building envelope specialist is going to focus on that because A is that's a lot of knowledge that they have, and B is if they don't, there's a lot of liability because they are the so-called expert. And that does lead, unfortunately, to sometimes conclusions coming out that perhaps they could have repaired, perhaps they could have been another way, but it's kind of almost professionally they're stuck to say what they're doing just because of the fear of liability, future liability.
Right.
So I think that a lot of that goes on.
Do you find is there any room there for conflicts of interest? Someone doing a report that is actually going to do the work?
Yeah, it's enormous. And it may not be any conflict in actual fact, but the implication that it could be there is absolutely enormous. And that's a place that I think, as of February the 5th of this year, professional governance came into place. So now there is a government oversight, the superintendent of professional governance. So if there is any conflict of interest and a strata reports it to the superintendent, I can guarantee you there's going to be an outcome that's not pleasing if there was a conflict of interest in fact occurring.
Good.
How are home inspectors and depreciation report writers regulated?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Okay, so home inspectors are regulated in BC by consumer protection. I don't know what was the sin of home inspectors, but they are stuck in there with uh, funeral directors, and nothing wrong with funeral directors, but they're so far removed from home
Doesn't
inspectors.
seem like a connection.
The travel industry, it's in my mind almost diabolical. There was a survey done amongst home inspectors probably around about a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, asking home inspectors if they wanted to stay under that level of government, or would they be willing to go to, something more building oriented. And I think the outcome was about 85% to 90% wanted to leave that level of government oversight and go somewhere else. Professional governance, that covers engineers, applied science technologists, technicians, of which I'm a member or now a registrant. And all of the inspectors in the office all fall under professional governance. So we're under these two different bodies now, which is kind of interesting. I do believe that there is a bit of investigation going on to see whether all in-home inspectors should fall under that grouping of professional governance. And I think personally that it would be a very wise decision if that was the outcome, because then there's a total standard amongst home inspectors in the province. And right now, it's all over the place. Consumer protection does not really have a standard. They require that the standards that the registered person pick one of the associations that's out there and say what standard they're following. Well, to me, that's really not getting a consistent outcome for the consumer, the buyer.
You wouldn't understand which, the difference between any of those standards, when they're choosing a home inspector.
Yeah, and you have, there's skill levels all over the place. And part of it I blame on some of these associations who have survived historically by bringing people into the industry, creating an education standard for them. And it's really hard. It would be like trying to get somebody with a Bachelor of Architecture and saying, well, we've got a 16-day course that we'll put you through, or a 3-month course, and we'll get you to that level. It's impossible. Mm-hmm. You can't.
No.
So what's the background of home inspectors? I know that people sometimes wonder whether, and is it worth it to have an inspection of a condo done?
Oh, okay. So 2 questions. Background of home inspectors, almost from anywhere. There's people doing home inspections who have never been in the building industry. They have done courses. They're intelligent people. And I'm not saying they'll be bad at the job. They just need to get a lot of experience to do it. That experience is going to come at the cost of the consumer, because they're going to do their courses, which meet government requirement. They need 50 hours of mentoring. And the person mentoring them must have 250 inspections under their belt as a minimum. That isn't actually confirmed by anybody other than an affidavit to say they've done it. So all the way along the line, there's a potential here for misuse of the system. Mm-hmm. And the person coming out the end is now gaining his experience by the inspection he does for consumers. And not all mistakes are caught. They may surface later. Well, now it's difficult.
Yeah. So Jane and I have been licensed since 2006, and I sat through when there's a building inspection, I like to attend the walkthrough. So that's when the findings from the building inspection, the inspector gives their report. And I jokingly, there's a lot of stuff in an inspection that I see over and over again. And I could, by rote say, make sure that the blinds are not near the heating units, and make sure that your dirt is, there's at least 6 inches of dirt away from the side of the house. There's many times as well, though, that I hear things I've never heard before, like that I'm learning something new. And it's such a depth of knowledge required. There's a lot of basic stuff that you see in every report. There's a lot of specialized knowledge. It's really important when it comes to saving somebody's investment and their decision around that investment, because this inspector has an awareness of building code, building construction, infestation, water issues, mold. They can see they're the house whisperer in the sense that they can sense and understand what might be there in the background that we, having sat through ourselves hundreds of inspections, are not going to see as realtors.
Sorry, Jane, go ahead.
Well, for condos, what I find the difference between when somebody from HomeCheck does a condo inspection versus other inspectors that my clients have brought in without my recommendation is, and I recommend 3, so they have a choice, and all 3 are good, but really you want to look at the common property as well as the condo itself, because although you're buying, let's say, one of 100 condos, you're also buying 1/100th of the common area. So you're responsible for a portion of that.
And absolutely. I'm going to cover both of those things. So the person buying in, that 1/100th is not that important if it's a $20,000 cost. But when it's a parquet membrane or a building envelope, and we're looking at $2, $3, $4 million, that's a significant amount of money now. The other part that Andrew was just touching on is home inspector is kind of like a tightrope walker in the circus. If you're sitting down in the crowd watching him, you look up and you marvel at what he's doing because it actually looks quite easy. It looks easy because he's done it tens of thousands of times in live shows and another 100,000 times in training. Mm-hmm. That is what a good home inspector is. For any applied science technologist, they must have Part 9 of the building code. They've got to have hazardous materials training, building envelope training, and they have to score 70% as a minimum mark in any of those disciplines that they're required to do. The CPDs are pretty strenuous, but I find most of the people involved there are well beyond the requirement for CPDs because they like to learn. We're science people, so we're continually striving for more and more knowledge.
Russ, what was the CPD?
Continued professional development.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's the other thing is I find sometimes we can get caught up in our jargon. You're pretty good at not doing that.
Well, I do it to show that I'm educated.
Right. Let's use big words and lots of acronyms.
Exactly, yeah.
One of the things I find too with condos versus houses, and this is just an aside to anybody watching this. If maybe you're watching this and you're not thinking of buying a condo, if you're buying a house, do your own little mini depreciation report on the house. Try to figure out what your future costs are going to be. A building inspector will give you a sense of, this roof probably has another 5 years left in it. Go get some quotes and try to understand what the future cost in 5 years of a new roof might be. Start setting that money aside. Just because we can do that with condos, but with a house, it might be a little more involved.
Yeah, and if you're going to do that, and that's really good advice, is start working out in your own mind what assets are flexible and what are inflexible. By that, I mean like the tires in your car are one of the inflexibles. When they're worn out, they're worn out. You cannot get any magic spray to keep them going. That's the same with the roof in the house. But you may find the windows, which I find often people come in, the roof's got 5 or 6 years left in it, but they come in and they spend, $12,000 on replacing all the windows in the house, right, which they could quite easily have fixed the windows, kept the money to replace the roof. So
I'm doing my windows right now.
But your roof's in good condition.
But my roof I get it demossed every 2 years, and yeah.
And I know that because I'm seeing you sitting there and you're dry.
Okay, do you have any other questions for Russell, Andrew?
No, I think I've exhausted my questions, Russell, but thank you so much.
Well, it's been great being here with you guys.
Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to say, Russell?
Just one last thing is any homeowner that's going to have any work done, make sure you're getting other points of view, other costs. I see homeowners sometimes stumbling into, they've struggled to get somebody, they got somebody, and the somebody they got is very competent, but he actually doesn't want their work. But he's way too polite to tell them, so he's charged them triple in the hope that they'll go somewhere else. So just be aware that the price is within your control. Sometimes the timing isn't, but do the repairs, do the maintenance, stretch it along till you can get somebody at a reasonable cost.
Great advice.
Great point. Great point. Yeah.
Okay, and how do people get in touch with you?
So office number 778-351-1928. And the email address is admin, ADMIN, at HomeCheck Canada, HRMECHECK, Canada.com.
Okay. Andrew, how do people get in touch with you?
Smoke signal. But they could also call or text 250-360-6106 or email me directly, info@andrewplank.com.
Okay, and I'm Jane Johnston with the Briar Hill Group at Remax Camosun. You can reach me at Briar Hill Group. That's Briar Hill Group at gmail.com, or you can give me a call at 250-744-0775. Take care, everybody. Have an awesome day, and hopefully we'll have Russell back for an update on what's happening in trends in depreciation reports and inspections in the upcoming year. See you later.
It's been fun. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Russell. See you, Jane.